So for those of you that are here for the first time, my name's Ryan. I'm one of the team at Good Innovation. I got a couple of my colleagues here too. We have John waving, and Yvonne. Wave at Yvonne. So, Good Innovation. We help businesses that do good to grow. And we do that by finding ways to achieve the commercial goals of your business through delivering your social impact and sustainability strategy. We really believe that for a business to truly be a force for good, you need to see purpose and profit go hand in hand, where one drives the other. And to ensure your business has a positive impact on colleagues, customers, and communities, it can't just be you and your teams plugging away in the corner. It needs to be part of the way everyone thinks, acts, and makes decisions, which is exactly what we're here to talk about today, the challenge of embedding impact into the culture and DNA of your business. But if you're working for a big organization, which all of you are, that wasn't born purposeful, this is really hard because you're talking about transforming the culture of a whole organization. Where do you start with that? Is it even my job? How do I do this when I'm so busy managing stakeholders and reporting and all the other things we have to do in our day-to-day? But one thing you all recognize from my conversations with those of you I've spoken to is that for this cultural transformation to happen, you need this cultural transformation to happen for your business to really be a force for good and to make a dent in some of those societal problems that your business has chosen to solve. Of the many businesses I've spoken to, there aren't many that have cracked this, which is why I'm really excited. We have Suzanne and Charlotte here today to tell us about the journey they've been on at Virgin and Virgin Money. 90% of the 8,000 employees that work at Virgin Money, I think I've got this right, tell me, go home at night feeling like they've made people happy about money, which is their purpose. So that's 90% of people in that business, no matter what they do, that are part of making impact happen. And that number has shot up in recent years from about 70%, I think. And that's been achieved by the thoughtful and deliberate work that Suzanne and her team do, and the fantastic leadership that people like Charlotte bring. And when I reflected on my conversations with Suzanne, there were 3 principles behind the approach you've taken that stood out to me a little bit. So the first one is, this is an infinite game. If we have any Simon Sinek fans out there, he talks about this concept of infinite games, where the rules are constantly changing and there's no end point. And I think if you talk about changing the culture of a business, this feels to me like an infinite game. I remember you saying, I think the phrase you used was, it's like when I slay one dragon over here, 2 more heads pop up over there, which I think sums it up. So I think it's really important to remember when we talk about this today that there are no silver bullets. It takes dedication, determination, and time to embed impact into the culture of an organization. The second principle is setting off small fires, which is a phrase you use, Suzanne. As I said, this all sounds very familiar, does it? It can feel like such a big, multifaceted task to change the culture of an organization. Where do you start, as we say? The way we talk about this at Good Innovation is change in a really big organization is a bit like turning a supertanker. It's very, very difficult to get it started. As soon as it's moving, it's almost impossible to stop or turn in another direction. But, as Suzanne said, if you can set off a series of small fires, it allows you to move quickly, fail fast, and build momentum. And the third and final principle for this change to happen is the need to align impact with the commercial goals of your business. I think this is the 8th event like this that we've held, and the topic that comes up every single time we do it, in fact, the very first topic for the first round table, was about making the commercial business case for doing good. And I know we're going to talk more about that in a second. So, just to explain how today is going to work, we're going to hear from Charlotte and Suzanne about the journey you've been on at Virgin and Virgin Money. You're then all going to have a chance to ask them lots of questions, so I think we've got about 15 minutes for a Q&A. And then in your individual tables, we're going to get you into a discussion. And we're going to ask one of you on each table to kick that off. So it's a chance for you to talk about this in the context of your role and the business that you work for. We give you about 15 minutes or so to have that discussion and ask questions and share ideas. And then I'm going to ask one brave volunteer from each table, or pick on someone, to just give a 30-second summary of what you talked about. And that's also a chance where we can come back and ask some further follow-up, more specific questions. So that'll be about sort of 20, 25 minutes. And then we're going to come back to your tables and rinse and repeat that process. So another one of you can start the conversation again, talking about how this challenge manifests for you, and then we'll come back for questions. So that takes us to 4 p.m., but we have this space until 5. There will be wine appearing, I'm reassured. But I know some of you have to shoot off, but I guess the last hour we've got the space, so it's a really good chance to meet some more people and keep the conversation going. So that's the plan. Let's start off by telling everyone a bit more about your roles and what you do.
Shall I go? Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us. Thanks for that intro. Thank you all for being here. Your time is so precious, and so we really appreciate it. Weirdly, I've got more words on the card that says "Tell us your name" than any other card I've got here, which I think is always quite strange. But I get so excited so quick that this is the bit I always miss. So, look, I've worked at Virgin Group for 16 years. I've had about 7 roles in that time, but all of them have been about purpose, just very different kind of breadth of remit every time, but always purpose. Currently work with Holly Branson, who is our Chief Purpose and Vision Officer in the group. We think about purpose in 3 ways. Just, for us, the why is about 3 things, really. The role and meaning we want to play in people's life, the impact, as Ryan's talked about, that we want to have on all our stakeholders and in the world. And then thirdly, that really important one around always thinking about the long-term consequences of the decisions that we take today. We're lucky in our group that Richard, as a founder, has believed in purpose perhaps with a lowercase p until it became an uppercase P for over 5 decades. And our purpose is changing business for good. I've had the great fortune of working with, I think it's like over 50 Virgin businesses in all sorts of sectors and markets. It's just very lucky to have a role like this. But one of them was with Virgin Money and Suzanne, and that's when we met and became really good friends. And I think we therefore do sometimes finish each other's sentences, so there might be a little bit of that today.
Yeah, absolutely, Charlotte. I'm Suzanne Smith. I sit across the purpose and community team at Virgin Money. So on a day-to-day basis, that means I have a purpose team, and we have a specific team that go and work with different parts of Virgin Money. So we work right across the business. We do small sort of projects that we call hits, and that's where we really support different areas and progressing sort of our purpose. The other part of my role is the community team, where I head up our charity partnership that we currently have with Mind and SAMH, Scottish Action for Mental Health, I should say, but they're called SAMH. And also our schools Make £5 Grow programme, and all volunteering sort of across Virgin Money. So I've learned lots of things to do and not do with regards to sort of purpose and impact along the way. So it's brilliant to be here today to speak to you all about that.
Super, thank you. So we're here to talk about the challenge of embedding impact into the culture of a business. Can you both tell me a bit more about how you think about purpose and impact?
Am I going to go on this one? So, the first thing to say is that impact is actually the only reason I work in purpose. The question for me really was, what's the maximum impact I can have? And so that's why I find myself working in purpose. I did previously work in the third sector. I had a brilliant career in the third sector, very fortunate there. But actually, I realised just how huge the opportunity was to work with businesses when they were much more serious about this stuff. So that's, impact was the driver for me to even embark on a purpose role. I don't see it as a challenge. I just simply see it as an opportunity that is breathtaking and infinite also, and exhausting therefore on that basis sometimes. I think purpose is just so much more than a strategy. So it's strategy that I work with the businesses on. But actually, for me, purpose is an attitude, it's a discipline, it's how you show up every day. I think it's a way of life. So I do think there are specific actions you can take to embed it in the culture, but I think it's also so much more than that. And I think that's what I like about that thought, is that's really accessible, because that means if it's an attitude, anyone can do it and play a part in it, which I love. In terms of the very specific kind of practical elements of how we think about embedding it in a culture, we kind of work with businesses to to, first of all, develop and articulate their purpose. We spend most of our time then helping them to think about how they do embed it in leadership and culture and everything they do. And then we, help them also think about the impact they're having and then how they might evolve it, because the world is moving pretty fast. So in terms of some of the specifics, I think we're just going to be quite tangible here. I think that's helpful as much as some of the big ideas is we, of course, first and foremost, think about governance. Absolutely key that it's embedded in governance. Absolutely key that it's evident at the top of the strategy, and then that cascades through everyone's objectives. That then, of course, instantly raises a question around incentivising and incentivising the right things, how you think about reward and recognition. And actually, when we think about embedding, we think it's a total and thorough re-examination, for example, of your whole people experience strategy. We think it's a total re-examination of your whole customer experience strategy. We think about how can purpose drive product, service and experience innovation. We, of course, are thinking through the value chain. So there are lots of different very practical pointers that we talk to the businesses about in terms of how they can really start to think about embedding in their culture. One of the things we were really quite specific about from the beginning, actually, with our purpose, changing business for good, was that what it absolutely must be is a driver of decisions. And so one of the advantages of that is that, first of all, everyone in this room, everyone in every business is making so many decisions all day, every day, whatever their role is. So that's a huge amount of change. But also when you focus on decisions, and as you said, it's something you never really arrive at, what that also means is that people, you have a culture of, change and continuous improvement. And that's really compelling. And I think people like to work for businesses that are dynamic and progressive and forward thinking and always on the move. And then I think we also have a compelling vision and values. And, we ask three things of our people, which is to be brave, be human and be visionary. They're really simple ideas, I think. And I think, look, the other thing just on kind of maximising impact is I don't meet many people, I'm going to come back to this theme, who don't want to have the maximum impact they can, whatever that might mean for them, because we've all got to get out of bed and come to work every day. So most people I've met want to have the most impact they can. And I think sometimes the key is just that they don't necessarily realise how much agency they have to do that. And so my kind of three top tips on this, and then I promise I'll let Suzanne get a word in edgeways. One I would just say is, I think it's really key that one of the things we've learned that I think is critical, because you can talk about kind of the ideas, you can talk about the practical steps, but one of the things I learned really early was that what happens if you go in a room and talk about purpose, which I'm sure you're all doing all day, is people are really excited and inspired, and you say you've got a role to play in it, and they say, great, I want to play a role, I love being here, let me play my role. And then I'd go back like a year later and they go, but what was the role? And I'm like, oh, I didn't put the time in. So when I would go back out to a finance team, at the end I would say, and as financial professionals, these are some of the things that I know you do every day where you can influence change. When I went back to a legal team, I'd say, and as legal professionals, here are some of the things you can do. The other thing is I always took the time with any individual anywhere in the group that wrote to say, how do I do this? Whoever they were, whatever their role, wherever they were on their journey in their career, to spend time with them to help them understand what they could do. So that whole agency point and just taking the time to give, as well as doing the big cultural piece, helping individuals recognise the role they can play. The second thing I would say is, which I'm sure you're doing every day, go where the energy is. Just go where the energy is. Like, there's so much to do and so little time that I just go where the energy is. I always have and I always will. And then the third thing, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later, is embrace those skeptics, because I think they make you better. They're my top three tips, but we can answer other questions later.
Great.
Super, thank you. So Suzanne, when I think about the journey that you've been on at Virgin Money, I think you've demonstrated exactly what Charlotte talks about there, which is the need to turn strategy into action. So much of the success you had can be traced back to the decisions you made or the structures you put in place when you first started. Can you tell us a bit more about how you've built that culture brick by brick as such? And have there been any frameworks or theories you found useful in structuring your approach?
Yeah, so let me take you right back to 6 years ago, and actually that's back when Charlotte and I sort of first met. We had come together as what was Clydesdale and Yorkshire Bank and Virgin Money, and to really bring those organisations together under the new, what would be the new Virgin Money. we look to really identify and develop a new sort of unifying purpose. And it was an exciting time, and we were set a really bold challenge. So our CEO in the run-up to Christmas said, yeah, we're going to engage 1,000 people. We want 1,000 voices by Christmas to develop this new purpose. So I think we had a period of like 6 weeks to reach that number of colleagues. So no small challenge there. And we used multiple ways to do that. So we had face-to-face workshops, we had webinars, we had online jams. And the reason I'm telling you this is it was so important to start off by listening to what our colleagues had to say. And Charlotte, you played a huge part in that, sort of coming along, holding all those sort of face-to-face events, and also speaking to a lot of our leadership team members to really sort of take all that amazing insight from colleagues and distill it down into a really sort of meaningful purpose. So I think the point I'm making on that is that we wanted it to have our colleagues' fingerprints all over it before we actually went to sort of launch our actual purpose.
You also had a purpose playlist. I still listen to it sometimes.
So yeah, definitely brought the Virgin in there. So we like to have fun with purpose too. And we did have some hits on our playlist. It was in the, like a Now album, if any of you remember Now albums. So we did have a lot of fun along the way, despite that challenge. And actually we reached 2,500 colleagues, so over a quarter of our colleague population. So following on from there, it was then really about launching our purpose. And we did exactly, I guess, what Charlotte talked about going where the energy is. So we actually identified colleagues who were really energetic and passionate about how they could go about embedding purpose and sort of the role and the part that they could play. And we called them fire starters. I'm not sure now when I look back but if that was the right term, but it certainly worked, and it was sort of really engaging for colleagues. And we gave them all a role to play in their own teams so that they could actually begin sort of having conversations with their teams about what could purpose mean for them. And we did sort of give them toolkits to support on that. We also held people leader workshops with every people leader across Virgin Money. And at that point in time, pre-pandemic, so we did them face-to-face actually.
Good old days.
That felt like a real privilege to be able to do that. And we did that through using something called route maps, where we actually encouraged people leaders to think, what does this purpose mean? What is the difference between what we were and what we're going to be? So that was another sort of critical part. And the other, I would say something that remains key to this day is we have a purpose council. I'm not a big fan of that term. I keep thinking we need to change that up, be more Virgin. But a purpose council, which is a senior leader from every area of the business. And it is a formal committee meeting. So Charlotte touched on governance. This is one of the ways we ensure purpose is taken seriously, and it's more than that statement on a wall. And we actually have board attendees that come along and sort of join that sort of every purpose council. So they hear what we're doing, what action we're driving, maybe some of the challenges that we have also. So that's some of the structure, I guess, that we've put in place, Ryan. And most of that sort of continues to this day. Yeah. Oh, and you did, sorry, one more point, because I just glanced at my notes. You did ask me, I like answering the question.
It's good, because the next question links to it. So.
No, you did ask about theories. So yeah. I think through a lot of what you'll have heard me speak about, it does link to like quarters 8 steps, but I've really got to say we didn't conscientiously follow any of that. It was more about how we felt we could sort of maximise sort of colleague engagement and get colleagues behind it.
Awesome. So I guess you used something like Cotter's 8 steps. You had a bit of a framework in place, but I'm really interested to know, how did you evidence your purpose and bring it to life for people?
Yeah, so this was really important for us as well. So it was about that structure that I've spoken about how we show we're taking it seriously, we've got the approach and the sort of mechanism in place. But it was also about creating real signature actions that showed colleagues that we were serious about this and it was going to mean sort of change. So we took some steps like really reviewing a lot of our policies and revising those, and really making sure they were more adult to adult in the way that we sort of looked at those, whilst providing, of course, people leader development on those. The other kind of key one was around our performance management framework. So we actually have team-based performance management, and it was about ensuring team goals of every team really sort of laddered up to delivering on our purpose. And also for colleagues being able to give feedback against like 2 other colleagues about what they were sort of taking action on in terms of purpose. And Charlotte, you mentioned sort of recognition. So we completely overhauled our recognition programmes, and we now have sort of Purposeful Teams Awards and Purposeful People as well. We had, this is a lot, let me just say, this all happened over quite a long time, so don't panic out there. This is like, you know, over a couple of years. But we also had a colleague decision-making guide, again, really not just about driving decisions from the top down, but for people and colleagues being able to change the way they made day-to-day decisions, really thinking about our purpose, challenging and questioning sort of some of the decisions that they were going to make. And I think you'll have heard through the way I'm speaking, but we did almost have our own sort of brand and language and tone of voice that really came through the change. And that was another sort of key signal to say, this is different, this is cultural change, and, you know, we sort of mean business by it, but we're going to have fun with it too.
So you talked, Charlotte, about the skeptics and kind of embracing the skeptics. So I'm really I'm sure can all say every organisation has some people that buy into purpose and impact a bit more than others, whether that's individuals or whole departments that are slightly easier or less easy, should we say, than others. So can you tell us a little bit about the kind of subtle forms of resistance that you encountered when you've been on this journey to embed purpose, and how you've tactfully overcome some of those? And I guess most helpfully, like what would you say to everyone? What's been the most successful strategy or tactic you've used to turn a skeptic of purpose within your company to an advocate? And I'd love to hear from you both about that from a group level and a Virgin Money level.
Well, for tact, I'd say see Suzanne, because she's much more tactful than me.
Oh, I can come in that one, because I can truly say we have met all forms of resistance. So maybe from what I'm saying, it sounds like we have this ideal setup, but believe you me, we still meet resistance. So we meet the people who say, well, we kind of do this already. We don't really need that purpose to do it. We sort of do this. We have the people who absolutely argue that it is no reason, you know, are very, very sort of sceptical of it. Let's be honest, it's just like a statement on a wall. Does it really sort of mean any change? So what I would say is we've taken completely different approaches, and I'm sure many of you would employ that same sort of approach. So we've had some senior leaders who we've had to listen really hard to understand sort of their concerns, what is the angle that they're coming at it from. And I would say listening is like really critical with some of those senior leaders, because usually there's something that sits underneath it or some rationale. And I think through evidence and speaking more to them and engaging, we have been able to sort of turn some of those sceptics sort of round. And actually one who I will not name because we have a camera, one who was particularly sceptical, became one of our biggest advocates actually, and one of our key sort of drivers of change. I didn't actually mention this in an earlier question, but we also have a purpose squad, which I talked about working with different areas of Virgin Money. So for teams who are kind of struggling and finding it sort of difficult, the purpose squad go and do a mini project with that team. They sort of identify and really listen to the colleagues about what's going on, what's the problems and what's really getting in their way, and understanding sort of the role they play and how it connects with purpose. And we actually then support them in carrying out sort of some actions underneath that. We also have purpose reloads. So we have a sort of measurement approach. We base it on the PROCEADCAR model, and we use our annual sort of survey, our My Voice, to ask questions. And through that, we get brilliant results that actually show us which people, leaders and teams are probably struggling the most. So it's data-led sort of action that we're able to take. And it isn't a slap in the wrist. It genuinely is, how can we come, share this sort of reload with you so that you feel sort of more enabled, and to share this with your team and sort of equip your team in facing into some of the changes that you want to make. Ryan, we've talked a bit about this before, but for us, test and learn is so important. Yeah. And it's so important in overcoming that resistance, because people are more willing when you sort of probe it and say, oh, can we just try it? Can we give this a go? See what the results are, and then we can maybe roll it out more, or if it doesn't work, let's, put it to the side. So I think that's something I'd encourage everyone to think about. How can you use that as a way to sort of drive some of the change that you want sort of forward? And then finally, we also have a Purpose Fest, so an annual Purpose Fest. It's become quite renowned, actually.
Yep.
Even other Virgin companies are very aware of our Purpose Fest. And we've had brilliant speakers like Charlotte and Holly as well come in, speak to our colleagues, and it's actually at times been a full week where colleagues have really been able to listen to some of the stories, some of the work we're doing, what the wider business is doing in terms of purpose. And I think it just really evidences and brings that to life and sort of energises and excites our colleagues again.
I'm just going to have two things, because if that's okay, because it's really comprehensive, there's not much to say. But I mean, first of all, who knew a bank would do a festival? Literally epic. But I think just a couple of things. I said to you that I went into purpose because I loved impact, but I also could have said to you I went into purpose because one of my other favourite things is persuading people about things they don't yet and aren't willing to believe. Like, that's really, really fun as well. I'm like, challenge accepted. When I go into a room to present, I usually say, particularly at board level, I'll say, who's my biggest skeptic? Like, I ask, and I think it's a sport. I'm like, come on. Because then if they like crack a smile, I'm like, good, we're there. Like, the other 11 are nodding and you're like, yeah, great. But like, where's my skeptic? Come. But let me just do this. This is one thing I've learned. Who in this room wants to do the right thing? Put your hand up, if you can. It was most of you. I haven't got my glasses on. I think it's sort of most to all. You've given up half a day. Let's just say it was all of you-ish. But here's the thing. If I then came around and said to you, what's the right thing to do? I'd get like 40 different answers. And so that's where I start. So my view is, I don't think people don't want to do the right thing. I think they do. But what I think is they've just sometimes got different opinions about time horizon or what the right thing actually is. So that's a good place to start. The second thing I'll just say linked to that is that I don't see it as a them problem. I see it as a me problem if there's a skeptic, because all I think is I haven't got them yet. I don't think they're really difficult. I'm just like, oh, what's the thing that's going to just get them in the end? And I will go at it for a decade, and I have, believe, if I have to, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get you in the end. And I just listen really hard, and I'm like, I will get you. But it's an accountability that I take on. I don't make it a them problem. I think it's a me problem. And I think it's about showing them, not telling them. We all can tell people a lot, but it's about proving it and showing them. And I'm just ruthlessly pragmatic as well. We've got this incredible thing, us humans, called language, and all the clues are in it. So like, I just listen really hard, and I think, I know what it's going to be, and I try again. And yeah, that's all I'd add. But we've had a lot of practice of that in the last 15 years.
Can you tell that I bring Charlotte in when some of the conversations get going?
Bring those skeptics. Bring them here.
Like we all need
bring
to
me
see
your
that.
skeptics.
Could be the next one. So you both spoke a bit about decision-making and decision-making guidelines. Charlotte, can you talk through how you think about this at the Virgin Group?
Yeah.
And why you're confident that they're genuinely influencing and potentially altering some of the decisions people make, rather than just being another one of those tick box type structures?
Yeah, it's such a good question. First of all, we're just lucky because we have brilliant people, so I'll start there. But our people, I said to you earlier, everyone says, love the idea of purpose, came to work here because of that, I want to play my part in it, it motivates me. And then they said, but what part? So we spent some time doing that, and we all talked about decisions, and we've spent 15 years helping people navigate decisions. And then they wanted to take more of the decision themselves. And so it was our people that asked us and said, when you talk about a purpose-driven decision, which you do all the time and you work with us on them, can you just explain a bit more clearly what you mean by that? And that was a really good challenge for us. And so what we did was we developed, it's a very simple tool. I think it sounds a bit grander than it actually is. It's a very, very simple tool that basically, first of all, addresses all our stakeholders, because we really care about all stakeholders, and then has a series of about 12 questions that you would come up, if you sat down for 5 minutes now, you'd probably come up with them, like, some of the key things we're all thinking about around sustainability, inclusion, transparency, whatever the range would be, and then some stretching ones, of course. And so what you do is, with a decision, you work through a material decision. I'll talk to you about the materiality of it. You take the filter, and you work through those questions in a team. So we designed it not to replace the conversation. We designed it to elevate conversations in the business because we think they matter. And so people will use the filter when they're making a big decision. In terms of kind of the materiality, we went around every single team in the business because all of them work in different ways on different things with different personality and professional types. And so we went team by team and we let people experiment with it and help us make it better before we kind of imposed it in any way. So that was kind of the approach. But actually, when we kind of started working with teams on it, the tick box thing's a really good question, because the first thing, we've got loads of really high achievers, was they all tried to tick yes in every column. And I was like, it's not an exam. And so we were like, no, that wasn't it. We're not going for full marks. If you think it's yes to everything, I think you're missing something. So we had to go back to people and say, that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for real rigor in some of the kind of different dimensions of this decision. And the materiality piece, we said to those teams when we went round to them, they'd say, which decisions? Now, I could spend 7 years working out all the decisions we take in a business and which ones they should apply to. I said, to Suzanne's point, adult talent, we said, you're grown-ups and you know your job better than we do, so we think you know which decisions. The only threshold we set is that it's in all our board papers. So any decision that goes to our board, and so you can imagine they're the material ones, have the filter at the front of the paper. So always there is a filter at the front of a paper. That does help set an expectation and a standard, I think. We've learnt so much using them. We offer ongoing support, and my kind of one observation about it, it was embraced far faster than we dared to dream, really, because people liked it. They had something to work with. It was practical. They could start to use it. The first time we went out and said, how was it for you? I think it was actually 100% of people just said, it makes me think about purpose more in my role and understand what it means better. So it was more better worded than that, but roughly that. We also provided lots of ongoing support. But my view often is that really all people want from us is just a little bit of air cover. So again, I tend to find that when people come to us, they're thoughtful, they're prioritising all the right things, they really care, they want to do a good job, and so they get about, let's say, 80% there. And all they really need from us now, I mean, it was different in the early days, of course, but all they really need from us now is just a little bit of air cover to get them across the line, and that's how we use it. So what will happen is they'll fill in the filter, project teams will work through the filter, they'll come to me and say, this is where we've got to on this decision, have we missed anything? So we'll have a look at, do we think they've forgotten anything that could be material? Sometimes I have to say to them, actually, I think you're being a little hard on yourself. You've done some good work here in the case. And then they will, submit it and it goes forward. So I think the answer, Ryan, in terms of the actual question that you asked, is along the lines of, we think it's working because everyone uses it, they want to use it. A colleague of mine just said she'd met someone in the corridor who said, she introduced herself and said, I know who you are because I use your filter every day and it helps make my job easier and I really enjoy using it for everything I have to do. We don't waste any time now because we just know what the things we have to think about are. And that's the kind of thing where I just think that's all we ever really wanted to hear. And then, of course, the board are playing their role in ensuring that they see all the filters. So you have kind of accountability in all directions. I think, is that enough? It's probably more than enough for most of you, but
Thank you,
leave it there for now.
I think you alluded to this a little bit there when you said it's not a tick box exercise. If you tick yes in every answer, something's probably going wrong, because the reality is there are obviously times when the commercial goals of a business rub up against doing good and some of the things your purpose is trying to achieve. So can you tell us a bit more about the moments when those priorities clashed, and I guess most importantly, how you navigate those moments when they happen?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. But first of all, I almost don't even recognise the question, can purpose and profit, coexist? I don't understand why the assumption is that they couldn't, if I'm honest. I mean, I know we live in a capitalist structure, but I kind of think, why wouldn't they? How you prove to me that they can't? It's a bit belligerent, I know, but I'm a bit like, why wouldn't they? I don't know, maybe we're not innovating hard enough, which is generally what I think, actually. Do you think it can be, and must be, a sustainable competitive advantage? Not shy about that, because if it is, we'll all do more of it, and that's better for the world. So I think that's a good thing. I think it can be a massive driver of growth. We've seen brilliant innovation in businesses in the group where they've taken purpose and used it to think about how they can innovate on product or service. I think the tension, almost always I've realised actually, one of the main tensions, whenever there is a tension, is about time horizon. So you've got some people, I don't think anyone doesn't want success, but you'll have someone there thinking about short-term profitability and someone trying to convince them they need long-term value creation. And it doesn't almost matter what the tension is. I realise every time that at the heart of it is probably just that they are just thinking over slightly different time horizons. And so I think, look, my view, I'm not going to talk to you about statistics. There are so many, I mean, there weren't back in the day, but there's so many things you can read about the case for purpose these days. So I'm not going to talk about that. But just from a principle perspective, I think, how can it not be the case that if you're considering all your stakeholders, it isn't better for the business? So I don't know if I think about, say, Virgin Atlantic doing a huge, or hearing lots of money, but, you know, they did a huge drive on inclusion in terms of thinking about the people they want to attract to work for them, and they doubled applications overnight. So, I mean, like, you know, how can that not be the right thing? If you try to reach more people and invite and involve them in, then you do, and you will. We talked about operationally embedding it in all those areas, and I think if you're thorough and robust about that, and I think partly it's about robust conversations. Like, I think we're quite honest about the trade-offs and the tensions, and we also know that in our business, everyone has really different thresholds. So what someone considers not purpose-driven versus what someone else's acceptance and tolerance levels are different. So that purpose filter helps us have those really robust and sometimes challenging conversations. So we never don't have the tension surfaced, or you were not ever not brave enough to try and navigate our way through it. But look, ultimately, because we think it's about decisions, we've invited and we've tried to enable and empower our people, for every single one of them in their role, to make better decisions every day. How could that not be better for the business? Purpose plays a huge role in trust. And in a world where we're not sure anymore whether, you know, what's real and what's fake, trust is such a critical currency, and purpose is so key to trust. And trusted businesses do better. Like, everyone knows that. And people are more loyal to businesses that do the right thing. So it kind of wouldn't matter what the entry point is. And when people do say to me, you know, I'm not sure they can coexist, I'm not going to pretend there aren't things we've had to do that have had a huge financial implication. But what the challenge then to us is, okay, well, what are you going to do instead? I mean, I just sometimes, if someone feels that it's completely intractable, I'm like, I don't know if you're innovating hard enough. And that's all I can really say about it. That's what I think.
Thanks, Charlotte. Susanna, when we spoke, you mentioned you'd be doing this for 6, 7 or so years, driving this agenda at Virgin Money, which is a long time. And I'm really interested in the concept of purpose fatigue as such. You know, do you find that after you've built that initial momentum and people are really excited, actually the challenge, the infinite game as such, is maintaining that momentum? Have you seen examples of sort of purpose fatigue and it feeling just like a buzzword again?
Yeah, so what I would say is we worked through sort of 4 phases. So launch, embed, elevate, and now we're on to supercharging. So again, you can hear the brand, I guess, coming through. So we do, and we also really look at a sort of purpose strategy across sort of colleagues, customers, and communities. And I think in that way, then, colleagues can sort of sense some of the momentum that continues to come through. I think something that's been really important for us is continuing to tell the story to colleagues, so about decisions that are being made, and, you know, really communicate with colleagues off the back of those decisions. So just to point out a couple of them, we have a partnership with the Good Things Foundation. So what we know is, I think it's estimated 5.8 million people will remain digitally excluded. I think it's by 2030. I'll check that one. But when you think about nowadays, you know, access to digital is so critical for us. And that also really impacts our money and finances. So it's estimated as well that 1 in 20 have no internet access in their homes. And we speak about sort of the story of that, but also actually what are we going to do in partnership with the Good Things Foundation. So All of our stores have now become data banks, and that allows our store colleagues to give customers and non-customers a SIM that has data on it, and just allows people to get that sort of access that they need. And you know, we've heard incredible stories from people going into our stores. One in particular always stands out. I did speak to you about this one, Ryan, but you know, a man went into a store, didn't have access to digital, was looking to sort of gain employment, and we gave him that sort of SIM card. Time goes by, and he actually came back into the store and said, you know, I really want to set up an account with you because I actually want my salary now paid into that account. And that's just one story, but there's so many more like it. Some of the other stories that we've been speaking about, our business bank is intending to lend like 750 million by 2027 into lending for sustainable development of energy. So again, that story on the sort of E side of ESG. And then our charity partnership I spoke about with Mind and Scottish Action for Mental Health. So not only is that about fundraising for those charities, but it's about really upskilling our frontline colleagues and how they speak to our customers about mental health. And it's about thinking about that cycle of money and mental health, and how sometimes having a bad relationship with money can negatively impact your mental health. But similarly, if you have poor mental health, it can impact your finances. So I guess telling those stories and just really ensuring that our colleagues feel our purpose coming through the actions that we're taking. We also always ensure that for new colleagues joining the organisation, we talk about purpose in their inductions and what sits behind that as well. And I touched on purpose reloads and of course our annual purpose fest, which sort of re-energises colleagues. But I think if you'd said to me sort of 6 years ago, would I still be doing this? I'd be like, oh, I'll have done purpose by now. That'll be it done. But it is the infinite game, and there's continuously sort of new challenges out there. But definitely an achievement last year, hitting that 90% of our colleagues said the work I do here contributes a great deal to our purpose of making you happy about money. And for me, that was like, wow. If you told me that at the beginning, I'd have thought that was sort of something impossible to achieve. So, yeah.
And I just think on this one, look, I just think like a bit like London, to be tired of purpose is to be tired of life. Like our survival depends on it. So as far as I'm concerned, like, you know, it's in your interest to stay, not you guys, clearly you're the converted, but it's in people's interest to stay interested in purpose. And again, same point, you know, and if they're not, what can we do to either supercharge or just kind of excite them again?
Thank you. So last question before some questions from you all. We're in a room full of people that are leading purpose in your organisations here today. So I'm just interested to hear from you both. Like, what does that phrase, purpose leaders, mean to you?
Oh, so many things. But first of all, thank you for your purpose leadership, because we know it isn't easy. And so I just think that's the first thing to say, because you're the people that are leading this change. In terms of like attributes, look, the future is telling us we need different leadership. It doesn't matter where you look, whether that's government, business, you choose your area to look at, but you're going to see that the future is telling us we need something new. Some of the things practically, you know, it's a privilege to have power, and so it's about responsible stewardship of it. That's obviously the first thing to say. I think after that, it's interesting because in a way our ego is getting in the way of our survival. So I think low ego is really key. We all know that the challenges we're trying to face into will only be achieved through some quite radical collaboration. And so, you know, there isn't really room for ego anymore. And so I think that's really key. Speaking truth to power, I'm sure some of you are having to do that in some really interesting ways in your roles, I can imagine entirely. Things like, look, it's really hard, like navigating complexity and ambiguity and uncertainty. My goodness, there is a lot of that to do now. You know all the obvious things like I'm going to say about things like integrity and compassionate empathy, like they sort of almost feel too obvious to say. Leading inclusively, you know, leading sustainably, having a growth mindset. One of the things we need as leaders to admit they're not the expert and they got it wrong. And if they could just do that every now and again, that would get us quite a long way on its own. And I think, you know, do the work. I think the other thing that would be really good for purpose leaders to think about is knowing that the best ideas can come from absolutely anywhere in the business. I think that is so key, and to not recognise that, I think, is an epic fail. And I had a couple of questions for you, because I just thought, in your role, there's a couple of kind of things I was just going to kind of, the first one I have is, what more can you do? So that doesn't mean in terms of hours, because I really, really, really prioritise work-life balance, and I know you're working really long hours. It's just, what more can you do, I think, is a good question to keep asking yourselves, because you're in these positions that are also very fortunate, and you may have the ear of people you can really influence. So what more can you do? I also think the next thing is, how can you be really bold? Because I think we have to be as a collective group of purpose leaders. And what I mean by that, let me give you 2 examples, because it's easy to say that, isn't it? But what does it mean? Well, for me, it means things like, often I think we're not even asking the right question. 9 times out of 10, I think the question was wrong. I'm not going to talk to you about the answer. Let's get the question right first. So sometimes I say that. And other times, I've walked out of a room where someone wanted to talk to me about the business case for something, can't remember, and I just said the moral case is enough. I'm not going to sit here for half an hour chatting about the business case about that, because the moral case is enough, and I'll come back when you're ready to talk about the action we're going to take. I agree that's a little bit bold, and maybe I shouldn't really recommend that, but actually, it's powerful. It won't be that. I'm not going to tell you to walk out of rooms. I'll be in so much trouble. It's on camera. But what I would say is that an equivalent of, don't accept the status quo. You don't anyway, but just don't ever, and don't accept the question even. Ask a different, better one, and get everyone to think about answering that instead. And sometimes just say the moral case is enough. Like, the business case really matters, of course it does, for some of the people we have to influence, some of the skeptics particularly, but also remember the moral case will suffice. And then, the other thing that I ask anyone, one of the things I sometimes ask our skeptics is, what do you want your legacy to be? And I think legacy is a conversation that sometimes gets reserved for a bit too late in life. And actually, I think we should ask it every day we're here, because I think if you ask that question, you'll make sure that your time is as productive as it possibly can be in whatever way you're deciding to make your footprint in the world. So that's...
Super. Thank you. Round of applause, I think.
Oh, that's sweet.
Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground there.
We're here for 3 days.
I
know,
it's
meant to be 20 minutes. Sorry.
I'm now imagining the next one of these is you wheel out your skeptics, and then Charlotte, you can have a go.
We put them in the stocks.
Yeah, in the meantime. A chance, I guess, for you to ask questions. So I think we've got a bit of a roaming mic, just to say that doesn't project your voice. It just means for the camera, it can pick it up and record it. But does anybody have a question they'd like to ask Suzanne or Charlotte? Did you catch that?
Yes, so this... Okay, then you can follow. We'll both go. So the first one, so I think in terms of sort of leadership, we've absolutely had that. And I think one of the people I spoke about definitely was one of our, turn the camera off, leadership team members. And I don't think it's always, I think it's a misunderstanding about some of the competing factors. And I think Charlotte spoke about the commercial versus purpose, and they shouldn't be seen as one versus the other. So I think it's really speaking about almost that business case for purpose to ensure people, you're speaking in the language of those sort of leadership team members, and they understand how both purpose and the commercial side can go hand in hand. And one thing we've looked at is bringing board members along. I think I talked about the Purpose Council, but bringing them into the conversation has been really valuable, because they can hear some of the work that we're doing in the wider business, and it's been, I think they find it really beneficial. It's been part of their sort of board engagement programme. So if you're looking for a lever to bring them in, to sort of show them the work that you're doing, and to talk about what more could be done, I think it's like opening that up to them to allow them to do that. So that was part one. Will I answer part two, and then we'll come to you?
You do too, and I'll just chip in with anything.
So part two on measurement. Very early on, we looked at lots of different potential ways to measure purpose, and I'm sure most of you have had a look at different things. It's complex out there, isn't it? It really is a minefield. So there's a couple of organisations that are sort of beginning to look sort of at that. When we explored one of them, we realised actually we had the opportunity to do it ourselves internally. And whilst it's quite a perception-based measurement that we do, we actually have a question aligned to ADKAR, so awareness of our purpose. So are you aware of our purpose? These aren't the specific questions, but desire, knowledge, ability and reinforcement. And we have a question aligned with each of those in our survey. And actually, when we bring that together, we generate a measurement score. And it allows us to understand how embedded our purpose is across the business. There's another piece though that Charlotte sort of introduced me to, which is more of a qualitative way to sort of look and sort of measure purpose. So I'm thinking about your dashboard. If you could maybe speak a bit more about that one.
Yeah, we're basically, I mean, I think the best way to approach it probably, and everyone is in such different places, is for us, we think about by stakeholder, because that's where it really matters. We've looked at lots of different models and we iterate all the time and we're not there yet. But if you go by stakeholder, then what you can do is look at the benefits that purpose is delivering to them. And then, of course, critically, in turn, how virtuous is that and how does that then benefit for you? So if I just take people, for example, is it making them happier? Is their well-being better? Are they included? Lots of other things like that are the positive benefits of purpose. And then, of course, in turn, is that the reason they want to work for us? Are they the reasons they stay? Is that why engagement is higher? And so we kind of would go by stakeholder and think about, first and foremost, the benefits to them, but of course, critically important, also the benefits to the business of doing the right thing. So that does that answer that? That's how we think about that. And then just on the, my main thing on that board question is, here's the thing, the secret I've learned is they're humans too. It's amazing. But what that essentially means, just for me, is a same thing. There are things they care about, they're motivated, and all I think is it's just finding in the right moment, the right way to engage them in the agenda. I don't mind if the idea ends up having to be theirs and it wasn't mine. Perfect. I don't mind if they're not, there. We'll get there in the next conversation. But I just listen really hard and understand what matters to them. And as soon as I understand what matters to them, I then make sure that I'm able to talk about purpose in a convincing way that links to the agenda that they're really passionate about delivering. And I don't know what else to say, because that formula, if you can kind of get it right, is a really good start.
Thank you. Amy. Well, you might need to wait for that. Hold on.
I was super curious about your purpose squad. I could imagine, as soon as you talked about skeptics and purpose squad, I could imagine the rolling back of the eyes in that situation. I was curious to know how you fund that and therefore encourage skeptics to prioritise that engagement when they potentially have so many other priorities.
That's a great question.
Which is partly why they're sceptical.
That's a great question.
I was curious to know how you can get them through the door, make it happen, keep them going.
Yeah. So the Purpose Squad in itself, if I go back to why did we establish the Purpose Squad, I think we recognised that, we're sort of over, I think at the time we launched we were about 9,000 colleagues. So to really get into the business, rather than everything coming out centrally, it was more about how do people sort of go in to that place. Also, those roles were identified as sort of people, colleagues that really have potential. So they are looking to develop in their careers. They are smart, switched on. They're looking to gain sort of broader development experience. And what that meant was we could bring colleagues from different areas of the business so that it's a multi-sort of skilled team. And in that sense, we were also able to, you talked about the sort of skeptics part, because of the measurement framework that I spoke about. I mean, this is now talked about in a similar way as sustainable engagement at Virgin Money. So we talk about ADKAR results and we talk about sustainable engagement. And we were able to then take a sort of data-led approach. So for some of those skeptics, we were able to say, well, your ADKAR score's telling us that people aren't quite getting it. It feels like you need a bit of sort of support with that. And, sometimes we did face, well, this isn't really the right time of year for us, you know, financial year, different things. So obviously it was a sort of two-way conversation, but it was to say, you know, we are coming in, but like, let's work out the timings and what that scope looks like. And I think it was about saying this is a partnership approach with you, and it's to support and help you. And often we'd ask for the purpose council member for the area to be the sort of lead on it. And then we would have sort of like someone who's sort of slightly less senior be our day-to-day contact. So we were really like working in partnership. Very quickly we were able to then evidence sort of some of the results. And I think at first we had a few people willing to try out the squad going in, and it actually sort of, the whole thing was to begin to make it a pool. And to be honest, right now, we don't have there's only 6 people in our purpose squad, so it's not a big team. And now there's, you know, what is it? Demand outstrips supply. So the demand for the squad is huge on different aspects, and we have to prioritise that. And, you know, the Purpose Council really do help with that.
Everyone needs a purpose squad.
Yeah.
Moral of the story.
Everyone needs to be in
And they are
Suzanne's purpose
brilliant.
squad.
They are brilliant. I can't speak about them highly enough.
Beth, you got a question?
Thanks so much both. That was really, really fascinating. I love the question you had around legacy. I often think that senior leaders are really motivated by what their kids think of them and what came up at the dinner table with their kids the night before. At the start, Suzanne, you talked about the fact that over all your time working on purpose, you've learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. I wondered if you'd mind talking a little bit about what not to do and your learnings from mistakes perhaps you might have made or learning those kind of learning points.
Yeah, so I think, oh gosh, I'm always thoughtful about this one, about what the best is. Yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot along the way. So there's some things that we've tried out that maybe, you know, haven't quite worked. We've maybe sort of pushed in to work with a certain area, and it's not really quite taken off in the way that we would have hoped. We maybe didn't have quite the full sort of senior stakeholder buy-in. And maybe we've not had the right sort of people to work with in the area. Therefore, it's just that contracting piece up front is really, really important. So when we're going in to work with an area, ensuring you've got the right sort of contracting and agreement in place, and you've worked together sort of on a scope and an agreed piece of work. I'd say sometimes we've went in and it's maybe been there in speaking about it, but not in action and follow through, and that's resulted in maybe not as much change as we would hope at the end of that piece. And in one of those situations, there was a change of leadership team member, and that can be difficult. So we all experience change and organisation structure changes. In hindsight, we wouldn't have done it at that point in time. It was the wrong point in time. What we did do was we went back in with the new leadership team member in place, and we really built sort of momentum and traction there. The measurement piece has been, it sounds so simple, and it is simple, but it has been so critical for us. And I would have probably put that in place a bit earlier in the journey. I'm trying to think how many years in we were when we introduced that, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 3. So I would have done that earlier, because that sort of really gave us traction, momentum, top of bank, looking at those results. Anything else?
I think the only other thing I'd say, the observation, Elizabeth, about young people is that when we started our conversations, the people I was talking to had children here, and I was trying to persuade them this would really matter to the next generation. They're like, maybe, and I was like, it will. And now they've got children here who are talking to them at dinner about everything you all know they're talking to them about. And I'm a bit like, I told you so. When they said it was tough at dinner last night, I'm like, I told you so. But I think the only one I would add to that is, and what we do is we've put into practice every day our learnings. Like when I said to you, tell everyone they've got a role to play, but don't forget to help them work out what the role is, things like that. We've kind of, every time we course correct. Like every day, we learn every day. The only other one I'd say is don't lose your sense of humour, because actually for us that's really mattered. It's really difficult. Sometimes you're dealing with really serious issues, but actually that wasn't the right approach for us. Our tone always had to be, there's some really important work for us all to go and get done in the world, but that doesn't mean we can't also have fun. I think would be definitely one of them I'd add. I think that's just really key.
Yeah, and the only other thing is, I think I mentioned this, but the purpose washing piece, like don't be open and honest and transparent, and don't try and cover anything up to colleagues, because it just doesn't work. They know the truth, and at times, you know, maybe once or twice people have said that feels a bit like retrofitting, and it's so important to avoid that, because that can really undermine your purpose.
I really thought, so one more, just because it really matters, because it's just tonal, but it really made a difference. I'm actually not a parent, but that whole positive reinforcement thing, we never said it's not enough. We weren't stick, we were always carrot. So all I would ever say to someone is, in the early days, when they took an action, that's brilliant, what next? I never said not enough, I need more from you. I just went, that's great, what are you going to do next? And that's, I'm sorry to keep going, but that just really mattered, I think, for us, because approaching it that way meant they became unstoppable, and then they, you know, exceeded our wildest expectations.
I think we've got time for one more question, Rowena, one more, and then we're going to, we will have a bit more time to come back for questions as well, but Rowena.
What you spoke about, for me, spoke to soft skills that a lot of your staff must have. You spoke about, I love the idea of low ego, about kind of this empowering leaders. You mentioned just really listening. It sounded as you spoke that you may have quite a lot of psychological safety. You know, the idea that you let people make mistakes, it sounds like there wasn't necessarily, you know, someone coming along with a big stick if they did make a mistake. The idea that you innovate, continually learning, and I suppose I'm really interested to know, to what degree have you seen the work that you do supported by investments and growth for leaders within the business?
I'll do a couple of principal ones, and then you did some specific work with leaders. But
Yeah,
just in terms of a couple of principles on that, and generous question, thank you. The first thing is, you know, listening, we both think it's the most critical, sorry, I'm not speaking for you, it's the most critical thing, but actually listening isn't hard. What's really hard is being willing to hear and respond, right? So that's like, you know, everyone goes, oh yeah, I'm a good listener. It's like, are you though? So I do think your point about listening. I also, one of my missions, and maybe we could all just agree it here, and it could be a movement today, I just can't even abide soft skills. The things you've just listed are the only things the future needs, right? That soft skills thing does my head in, because I'm like, there's nothing soft about that stuff. Look at what it's delivering in the world. Look what paucity we have of some of those things. So yeah, that's a personal mission. Join my campaign outside later. But so just, and I think, you know, no question we have had to take leaders on a journey. I mean, you know, everyone didn't start where we are today, and you actually did some quite structured work with leaders.
We have, yeah. So we've had some leadership sprints, so we have some great leadership behaviours, and in terms of those behaviours, we actually did some sort of structured training around some of those, so like always agile, leading with purpose. Of course, I'm going to forget the rest whilst I'm here, but those were really key to get sort of leaders into this sort of mindset and really thinking about the sort of change that we were trying to drive. That psychological safety piece is huge. I mean, so much of our work has been about empowering our colleagues and enabling them, and to ensure that they feel safe to speak up. And actually, recently, we've just held a storytelling sort of session across the group, which has involved really sort of seeking out brilliant ideas from some of our frontline colleagues about changes they want to make in the business, training them and really upskilling them in storytelling, and then having sort of a really senior level audience and colleagues all come and join to listen to them. And you know, it's that inverted pyramid, isn't it? Ensuring that like all colleagues are heard. So it is about sort of how you can build that psychological safety and showcase it as well.
So now is the time for you all on your tables to have a bit of a discussion about what we've heard today. As I said, I'd encourage one brave soul to kind of kick it off and talk about how this question of embedding impact into the culture of your business is shaping up, what the challenges you have, what the questions you are. We always design these sessions. I think it's really useful just to be able to talk to each other and to your peers.